Hey guys, back with another Echoing Thoughts podcast here, episode number 24. And a few days late after the patch, the June patch, but for good reason. It's been kind of the main course of this patch was the battle analysis implementation. I also dabbled with the Arcane River Dream Defender for the symbols. That was really long. Took me about 45 minutes. Timer probably took a little bit longer with cutscenes and things like that. Really long for a lot of symbols. Don't know too many people are going to do that, but I'll probably do a little bit of it and see just for the symbols. But the main thing of this patch was the battle analysis, something we've been waiting for a long time. So I'm just going to invest all of this podcast to kind of talk about it, everything I'm going to do with it, everything I've done so far. I've learned, talked to a lot of people that are doing even their own testing, kind of answering my questions. Just a lot of people are doing a lot of, like I say, just God's work. They're just doing things behind the scenes to really benefit themselves and the community, right? There's things from individual class tests to class tiers list to kind of learning how min-max rotations, how things like if levels matter compared to boss, ignore enemy defense, how that affects cap for clones, how some skills just work. It's everything, right? And kind of the Paladin class kind of centers around Paladin. You're finding that the Paladin class, it's not just because it's my class, but it's very unique. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, what I did to test, but there's just so many things that I didn't want to do the podcast immediately after, kind of as an emergency podcast, without giving time to test, for me to test, for other people to test, just to give you guys the right information, not just kind of be the first one to say things, because a lot of the times that we learned, it was one way, immediately after it was debunked. It was proven untrue. So I was just trying to wait a couple days, Friday, June 9th, when I'm recording this, just to give you the best possible information to run with. So with that being said, the first thing I want to talk about with the battle analysis is what I did first off. And I think a lot of people should start doing is just go in, right? There's into battle analysis, the battlegrounds, and just test your rotation. 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 120, up to 5 minutes you can do, right? Increments. And it's just going to give you data. It's just going to give you numbers, what percent of your damage comes from X skill versus Y. Maybe some things aren't as important as you once thought. For example, soul summons. Pier, thought to be very, very strong, very good in guild dungeon because it gives quite a bit of lines, especially for paladins, where our echo lines actually clone soul summon lines as well. So it's actually twice as valuable as it is compared to other classes. It does, I think, 0.5% in boss settings, because a lot of factors, right? The lines don't cap. It's not that frequent. It doesn't have ignore enemy defense in it. It's underwhelming, right? Especially with all these rebalances that are coming in. Lines are going up, skill percentage are going up, cap is going up. Soul Summon has stayed consistently the same. It's not getting any nodes to it. So it's pretty outdated, especially in boss settings. 0.5% damage. So if you're deciding between like Hilla, which is cheaper cap, versus Volneon versus Pier, or if you heard that like Vellum is, Pier is better than Vellum, whatever it is, I'm here to tell you, maybe from my experience, from I think a lot of classes experience, soul summons are nothing, right? It's like people would debate between a crit damage emblem and a boss attack emblem, and wanting to know crit damage or a boss attack. Soul summon is even less important than that to damage. So just keep that in mind. Cheaper option may be the play, probably is, because soul summon is not as impactful in bossing settings, especially the higher end bossing. Maybe in guild dungeon it's a little bit better, but in bossing, definitely not. Another thing I learned is, for paladins, we are a one button DPS class, right? One preset, or they're one preset one skill. It's kind of shocking, but not surprising to see that about 55 to 60% of our damage is one skill. We only press one button, right? All of our skills come passively through using our blast skill, which is our only skill that we use. So the data shows, we can use an X amount of blast attacks in 60 seconds, right? Then you can kind of just go from there. That's the ideal. Over 2 minutes, you should be doing this amount, 3 minutes, whatever it is, 90 seconds. So you want to get that baseline of how many lines you can do, say, in a minute, and just go from there, right? And then when you want to, you compare it to a bossing setting, right? Lotus or Card Magnus, you can see how many attacks are you getting in compared to how many you do in battle analysis, right? That difference, that percentage is kind of dependent on how much damage you're actually doing. If you're wondering why you may not be doing as much damage as you think you are compared to what your gear, your cap should be, first thing I would do is look at, are you getting enough attacks in, especially for paladins, because we don't do any other damage. Literally all of our damage comes from blast attacks passively, through procs and things like that. So if we're not hitting, we're doing no damage. So it's really important for you to decide if your class is that important, right? If most of your damage comes from one skill, like paladins, you have to find ways to attack, right? Survive and attack, because it's not just blast lines, it's divine judgment lines, it's ADI lines, it's final attack lines, it's weapon aura lines, everything. And I'm sure for your classes as well, a lot of things proc off of your main attacks, right? So if you're struggling with DPS, it's nice to see how many lines you're doing in the controlled setting of battle analysis, and then compare it to Arc, Hard Magnus, Lotus, Damien, Chaos Rudibus, whatever it is. That's the goal, right? So for example, my Arc run, it was about, did the math here and there, kind of base it off what I was talking about, and I was around 93% of optimal, possible 100%, right? If I was a possible 108, I did 93% of that in a minute, right? So that's pretty good, right? For Arc, you just stand there, you do DPS, some things interrupt it, some things happen. Maybe I have to do another skill, use Noble Demand, I have to res, I have to move your position. 93% is probably as good as it's going to get in a normal bossing setting. Then you can compare that to Lotus, right? What is the optimal number of lines, attacks you can get in Lotus? And then in Damien, I think Damien is actually pretty similar to Arc. I was around 88%. Well, 88% of the math that I did, because Damien, you don't get full uptime because of the flab skills, the iframes, the invulnerability phases that Damien has consistently. Did a little bit of math, 88%. Not surprising because I'm standing in the corner for phase 2. I'm aggro most of the time, so it's pretty easy to kind of treat that like guild dungeon. So, but 88% is really good, right? And if you're at like 50, if you're at 60, 70, that's an easy way. 20% more attacks, 10% more attacks. That is what's going to help you do the most DPS compared to more cap, more stats, things like that. Just simply attacking more, it adds up. Like you'll see, it adds up real quick. Your damage is going to go up. You just see from run to run, just getting 5 more attacks and how much that damage that does for you, such and such. So that's something that I was trying to, just for myself, finding ways to improve and min-max DPS and just, see if I'm reaching my potential or if there's a little bit of room to grow here and there. And then finally, for, one of the things I was looking for was just my damage breakdown. Like I said, Blast does about 60% of my damage. Final attack, or people's V skills, for example, may not be doing as much damage as you think, right? Or for us, final attack does about less than, I think it's like 1%, less than 2%. And this is a skill that I thought did a lot of damage previously to battle analysis, right? It's part of our perfect trio, right? It gives, we have ignored me defense based on it. We have, we level to level 60. It's one of our main skills, and it does 1% of damage, right? That's just insane to me. And people are sort of trying to figure out, how important are some of these skills? Maybe the rotation's changing. Maybe these skills aren't as important as others, right? It's just something, the data is right there, right? It shows you in a controlled setting. You're doing like where your numbers are coming from and where you can invest, where you can improve. So you're not capping on some of these skills. That's where stats can improve it, right? Things like that. You may be thinking you're capping on these lines and you're really not. So it's very, these are sort of the things that I've been testing and trying to compare and then see if it matches in bossing, real bossing settings, right? So that is sort of the introductory to what I've been doing the last couple of days, just for my class specifically, to help me improve my DPS, just to learn about it. And then, so then I want to talk about something that I discovered that we've been really having a hard time with. It's kind of now what I believe is probably the best skill in the game, the best support skill in the game, maybe, possibly, but definitely the most unique skill in the game. And I'm not saying that it's because of the Paladin class, but it's very, it's Divine Echo, right? It's something that really was confusing. We never really understood why Paladin's damage was so much higher when Echo was up. It was about 3 to 4 times. We didn't really understand it. It was really hard to see where the damage was coming from until now. And if you don't know, Divine Echo, basically, it's a buff. It's our V1 skill that you can choose a teammate, a party member to bond to. It's the word they use. And basically, you give this bonded person buffs. So you can give them Synchro, you can give them, so which is 30-second iframe. You can give them a final damage % buff as well. It's 90 seconds cooldown on 180 second, or 90-second duration, 180-second cooldown. So it's up half the time, right? And this is huge, right? It supports, give it to your biggest DPS, helps them survive, helps the team min-max, you want a PR, whatever it is, do the most damage. You give them Divine Echo, and it helps boost them, right? But for the Paladin in return, we actually get this bonding effect that we get 15% lines, or it says damage, from active skills. So an active skill is Blast. That's our active skill it's talking about, Blast attack. So previously, we thought that, just 15% on top of what we were doing, right? 15% lines from Blast. So it wasn't a huge number. Obviously, those lines don't I think they're soft capped in a sense, so you can't cap these lines per se. So I thought, it's not that big of a deal, but it didn't really translate to why our peaks were so much higher than our, when Echo was up versus when it was down, right? Until battle analysis. And the funny part is, if you're not in a team setting, you don't get that 15%. You don't get that extra lines. So it was sort of misleading because in guild content, Paladins are still very, very strong, right? They have a ton of lines. They do a ton of damage. Obviously, one of the best per line classes in the game because of Echo and things like that. Because Echo clones all of our skills: Blast, Hammers, Divine Judgment, Final Attack, even our Soul Summons, our Pure Summon, everything, right? So it's double the lines. It's huge. But now with battle analysis, we discovered that this skill is even more OP than we thought, right? And it's what we found out is in a party setting, we get the 15% lines is actually another clone. It's actually, I like to think of it as 2 other clones. So, but it's just clones of Blast lines, right? So their initial Echo lines is really confusing. Maybe the initial Echo lines buffed. So we get 55% is an initial clone, right? Team setting, solo setting. We get 55% for 90 seconds for half the fight. Huge, ton of damage, right? So let's say Blast, for example, 16 lines, I think it does. So 16 times 2, 32. That's just solo content, right? And 55% of damage is that first clone. So what Echo does in a team setting, it actually gives that 15% of Blast. So, and then another clone does 15% of the 55% first clone. Really confusing. Basically, 16, each Blast line does 16. You do the first clone, which is 55%. The second clone, which is 15% of the initial Blast. So blast line, right? 16 lines. This one, 55%, 16 lines. This third one is 15% of the actual 16 lines. So 16, 16, 16. This fourth one is 15% of this clone, right? So it's still 16, 16, 16, 16, but it's 100%, 55%, what we thought was 15%, but then now there's this extra one. I think it's 15% of 55. So it's like 8.25%. So it's 4 lines and it's only 8.25%, right? So it's not huge, but it's extra 16 lines. So like a guild embossing settings, this is kind of what we didn't account for. It's just an extra X amount of lines over time, right? So if we do 108 lines, blast lines per minute, 108, this one, and 108, 108. So 400, 1632, 432 just blast lines, just straight a minute for half the fight. Not including weapon aura, not including cloned weapon aura, righteous hammers, final attack, everything. Summon, divine judgment. So did all the math. Basically, in a team setting with a bonded partner, which is what we're talking about because it's bossing settings, our lines went from about 1400 per 3 minutes, which is what we've been tracking, about 1400, 14.2, all the way up to 17.3 lines every 3 minutes because of these extra 2 clone lines right there that we didn't really account for because you can't see it in battle analysis because battle analysis is solo. It's such a fascinating mechanic, something we would never have been able to learn without battle analysis, but also one step further, having to see it in a team setting. So we had to do a lot more working and testing. And it's just, we tried to think of it. We had other paladins, Tristan, who is the man. He's doing all these testing with, he's kind of part of Song's team, their Song's team, his team, whatever it is, their team, doing all of the tier list, all the number crunching, kind of just creating spreadsheets. You're going to see it come out real soon. They're just doing amazing work. They're also with Truffle Locks. They are just killing it, doing everyone's, every class, testing it out. He was the one that kind of answered all my questions, did all these testing. So it's just amazing. Shout out to them for doing all this work and finding this. And, it's just kind of makes sense, right? And you're probably thinking like, well, now, like, of course, Paladins are OP. Like that's such a broken OP skill. I'll talk about why I think, what I think they do to balance this out, because the amount of lines is insane, right? Over 3 minutes, 17 something. Other classes are in the 14s. I think only Blaster is above we're actually at 19. Sorry, we're at 19. Blasters are a little bit higher. Mercedes were in 17s. Everyone else is kind of in the 14, 15s and 13s, 12s. It's kind of insane, right? It's pretty mind-blowing. Kind of we're testing in that 3 minute increment because that's where most cooldowns are kind of coming down and coming back up. Allows these more sustained damage classes to sort of catch up to the burst heavy classes like Echo, like Paladins. A lot of the strong classes, Paladins have kind of 90-second, some have 120-second cooldowns, 180-second duration, 180-second cooldowns, right? So they have some downtime, and that just allows like classes like Shadowers or Shades or like Demon Avengers or Pathfinders to kind of catch up. So it kind of creates like a balance, right? That's the most balanced time frame there is, right? But Paladins or Blasters are still kind of the best classes, are still so much ahead in terms of lines. And not all lines are created equal. Let's just get this straight out of the way, right? Like, you guys are going to see these tier lists. Like, there's like S tier with Blaster and Paladin. Mercedes is probably S tier. Then there's like a whole bunch of people at A tier, right? And you're going to be like, oh, these classes are way too broken. Like, I think what they've done to rebalance it, I'm not 100% certain, but what I've seen a little bit of testing so far is that classes with quote unquote clones, Echo, Thieves, Shadow Partners, things like that, Mercedes, that have skills that kind of clone main attacks, I think there's a soft cap to those. I'm pretty sure I saw in battle analysis. Now I can't for sure see this in bossing content. I think it's gonna take us some testing to confirm this, but I'm pretty sure that there's a soft cap to these clones. So basically what I'm saying is if your cap is 20 mil and your clone does 50% damage, I think with ignore enemy defense or whatever it is, I think it's mainly ignore enemy defense. I'm not sure what actually creates it, but I noticed when I did some battle analysis testing, when you have ignore enemy defense in there, the minimum damage that you do. So you have the max on the sheet, minimum. The minimum, there was a cap to it. One of my lines was at 40% ignore enemy defense. Was the max was 14 mil. The minimum was around the 6 mil mark. So what that tells me, and that was consistent for multiple skills. It was like 6.64, 6.64 as well. And so what that tells me is if the numbers are the same, that's a cap, right? That's a cap. So especially on the charts when there's so many different numbers. So it feels like that is how they're kind of sneakily balancing the game, where even though you have so many lines, like Paladins, those majority or percentage of those lines cannot hit the peak cap. So you'll see like it doesn't really, the gain isn't as big as people think. It's still big, right? I'm not saying these classes are not as good as, are not the best classes. They are, right? More lines is king for sure. But it's not as impactful or noticeable in guild content, in bossing, as it is in guild content, right? For certain, like for example, Paladins, Mercedes, I've seen my point of view, Mercedes' point of view, other classes' point of view with clones. We're hitting like 3 mil lines, 3 to 6 mil lines, right? And even if they're clones, they're small percentages. With our final damage and our stats and buffs and things like that, 3 mil is way too low, even if it's like 8% or 15% of your damage, right? So that's way too low. So that's telling me there has to be some sort of cap that's preventing it from getting any higher. So of course, this one is something that I'm still kind of working through. Something I'm still not sure, but that is what I'm 75% sure is the case. If I learn anything otherwise, I'll be the first to admit that I was wrong. But I think it's just important for people to understand. They just look at lines, that lines is everything. It's not. Cap is still a huge role, arguably more important. And if you're not able to hit cap with all those lines, they're just not as beneficial, impactful, right? Like final attack or some of my smaller skills does a ton of lines, but they're hitting really small, right? They're not capping at all. So it's not in the grand scheme of things, the percent of damage that it does is something, but it's not everything, right? So not all lines are created equal, especially in bossing content, especially with ignore enemy defense. And as you get to the higher end bosses, it's super important for people to understand that before they just start calling for, kind of looking at the data and misunderstanding, just kind of taking lines as the only, variable in damage. So way more than that, right? So one of the other things that we learned, tested, arguably kind of something we've, again, thought about for a long time, never been able to prove until now. And that's that the secret sauce, the secret stat that you are overlooking that directly reflects on your damage is levels. I'm telling you, I've talked about it before. I've talked about it a little bit before, how hyperstats and matrix, how leveling is so important with hyperstats and matrix points and other factors that you're missing out on levels. This is just proving it even more. In battle analysis, we've seen data. Now, we don't have the exact numbers on how many levels above boss is sort of the cap, but let me break it down to you a little bit, some of the things that we did test, right? Level 1 boss, 0 defense. You are capping everything, right? There's no defense. There's nothing stopping you. All your lines are going to cap. If you're level 230, right, and the boss is level 230, or a normal boss, you are going to do a percentage under this quote unquote percentage under compared to if it was a level 1 boss, because that disparity is so great. Now, it's not just saying it has to be level 230 versus level 1, whatever it is. There's a certain level threshold above the boss that's going to be kind of the cap to it, right? Whether you're 10 levels above, for example, or 230 levels above, it's all going to be the same after that certain point. We don't know what that level is above the boss. I've seen things from 20 levels above, 21, 22, 23. We're still trying to figure that out, right? And how much percent that is, I think it's about 10%. Again, this is something we're working through, some of the things we're learning, but just something that we're for sure certain that levels matter. It matters. We just don't know what the percentage. We'll get there. And it's definitely a factor, but it makes sense. I like to think about, not even for bossing for a second. When I would train alts or anything at level, say, Starforce 144, right? The mobs are a certain level, and I was level like 130, 140, and I was missing and dying and not doing a lot of damage. Then all of a sudden, as I gained levels, got to level 140, level 50, I was starting to kill stuff. I was starting to, die less, use less pots, get more kills, level faster. My stats didn't change at all. It's not like I was bumping up hyper stats, leveling gear, adding more Star Force, nothing. The only real thing that changed was levels. And shockingly, my damage went up. Missed less, killed more, died less. Damage numbers were going up. That's just one example, but it just makes sense, right? We've all been there. We've all seen it, and it totally, now we can prove it, right? We will prove it. But just kind of gives us time, but just something to think about, something that we learned that is definitely a factor, right? It's not everything, but again, it holds true with people that try to reroll level 200, first bossing. You think you're going to hit this much, you realize you're not hitting as much, right? You're hitting a percent, you're hitting slightly less, right? It all makes sense, kind of adds up. It takes time, right? And it makes sense, right? Nexon is pushing leveling, a huge part of the game, benefiting the people that level, right? Leveling is, auto battle is the mobile game, right? That's the majority of the time you're spending with. That's, people, that's their moneymaker, in a sense, one of their big money makers. So it makes sense it's a mobile game that levels would have some sort of benefit to having levels, right? So that's just something we're learning. Continue to, when I get the numbers, I'll share with you on this podcast. There's a lot of people that are doing a lot of tests. They want to make sure they get it right, right? They want to make sure that they're doing all their double, triple checking, things like that. And then, but for sure, levels matter. And then we're trying to find out commander bosses, what level they are. That's already been proven, right? You look in the commander tab, you'll see it tells us exactly what that level is. Hard Magnus is 170. Arc, Lotus, Damien are level 200. You plug it into battle analysis. Your lines in battle analysis are going to match, your cap in battle analysis is going to match up with what you're hitting in that boss. Check it. Pretty sweet. Simple, right? Things like that, right? So that is a cool thing that we were able to discover. Again, it's not, I'm honestly not doing a lot of the testing. I'm kind of just the one asking the questions, kind of wondering, and a lot of people are doing all the work behind the scenes. So I got to give credit to them for doing a lot of the heavy lifting. I'm just interested and asking the right questions to a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me. But really, the best thing about this battle analysis is kind of encompassing everything from how many lines you do in a minute to 2 minutes to 3 minutes, what your damage breakdown is, how much damage you're doing, your min, your max, attacks in, everything that I mentioned. This all basically boils down to rebalances, right? Getting the rebalance right. Previously, we didn't have a lot of data, right? We were kind of just sharing things based off Korean Maple Story. We're sharing things based off of, half as much data as we have now, right? We're just kind of just going off with the peaks and valleys from 1 minute to another. We're using Arc, we're using Lotus, trying to, guild dungeon, all these different factors from a 60-minute fight to a 90-minute Arc run to a 6-minute Lotus run, all of these things, right? Basing it off a cap and things like that. Now we just have the numbers, the data, right? People, again, are doing a lot of work behind the scenes. There's going to be a lot more data time to kind of figure this out. But the best thing that this battle analysis thing does is it just allows us information to present for rebalances, right? That's the most important thing, balancing the game. So step one, Figure out how many lines we do in 3 minutes. People have already been submitting information for their classes. It's not that hard, right? Your fingers may be sore after, but just a few tests here and there, and you'll just get a rough estimate, a good estimate of how many lines you're doing in 3 minutes, right? Compare that to other classes, things like that, and you can see how many of your lines are capping, right? And then people are going to data crunch, kind of, estimate of how much damage you're doing, and that just is data, right? Real time data for bossing and all these things that we can kind of manipulate to match Lotus and Arc and Damien. Kind of this is the peak of the peak. Instead of having to worry about skill cap, team comps, deaths, things like that, you can just see this is the ideal situation, the ideal numbers if it's a controlled setting, and that just eliminates so many variables, right? Things that we had to really have an asterisk on previously. We don't have that anymore, right? It's controlled. Now, obviously, this is the high end of the high end, right? It's how challenging your class is based on mechanics, boss mechanics, and survivability, mobility. That is obviously a factor to reaching that potential, but at least we have the numbers, the math to have it as a baseline. And then, like I said, depending if you do 90% of your ideal uptime, your peak, or 75%, that's on you, right? That's on the player, the team, whatever it is. But at least now we have the ideal and we can go from there, right? We can go from there. Rebalances will be much easier to kind of give feedback. We'll have the numbers to back it up. And I feel like it's just a tool, another tool in the toolbox, probably the best tool in the toolbox to validate rebalancing certain classes, right? You can already see right off the bat, certain classes have much less lines. They probably cap all their lines. Shocker, those are the classes that are not performing that well, right? Shocker, the classes with the most lines are doing really well, right? And guild content and everything, in bossing, like Blasters, Mercedes, Paladins. No surprise, right? Use that as a template, create Maple Story, whatever they want to do, but at least we have data to show for it. That's nice. That's the best part. That's all we can ask for, right? That's all we can ask for. And it's exciting, right? For me, a lot of testing. I personally didn't do a lot of testing, but a lot of chit chat, talking. And I think that's kind of exciting for the game, right? Exciting for the community until, gets people talking, testing, and seeing like, how can you min max? Why did I do so poorly in this run? You can see the data right then and there after your run, right? You don't have to record your run like I do and kind of nitpick every single thing, see what my lines are, why I died here and this and this. The numbers are right there, loaded in the game. Take a screenshot, whatever it is, save it, done, improve. Amazing and exciting, right? And the best part is we're going to get a month. V3 is going to come in, more testing, more theory crafting, learning, experimenting. Rebalance is going to come in 3 months, whatever it is. That's exciting. It's just fun. Like, I don't know. Like, if you enjoy the game, enjoy just playing your class, and just want to learn a little bit about how to do more damage, how to play your class better, see if you're playing your class better, do that. Talk to people, learn, have a good time. Because I'm having a great time. I'm having fun. I wanted to get this podcast out as soon as possible, but I just had to, like, as much as I talk about things that I know, it's only 2 days in. There's so many things that I'm still learning about. I still want to test. I'm still thinking about. Like, we just had our shadower who I gave echo to, ran like for 30 seconds in the end of our Lotus run. My blast lines were showing up in his battle analysis. I did 3% of his damage in 30 seconds. I did 13 bill damage. He got 13 bill damage from my blast lines through echo. Is that how it's supposed to be intended to? I don't know. Didn't see it in any other classes, players that got echo throughout that run or in other runs. But if that's the case, if that's how it's intended to be, or if that's just a bug, that's insane, right? That's insane if it's supposed to be that way. then Echo will definitely be the best support class. People are going to be I'm going to start charging mesos for that, just for Echo. If it's free damage, if it's free stats, things like that. So we'll see. That's just another thing. Just so many things to think about, to test, kind of nerd out on, and I hope you guys kind of dive into it a little bit, right? You don't have to be as thought out, and you don't have to do all these tests. For me, I like me, but something, dabble with it, test it out. You might enjoy it, you might not. You don't have to buff or anything like that. It's unlimited tries. Took up a whole podcast to talk about it. It's just that awesome. There's just so much information and so many tests that we did already. Didn't even talk about Damien. I'm gonna post. I think by the time this podcast come out, I'm gonna post our last Damien run. We made it through 10 minutes. Our last one was about 8.5. We saw the second orb. This one we made for the entire 10 minutes. Mechanics are getting better and better. Excited, like not just for our testing, but I hope I'm sharing and helping other teams get excited about it. Maybe believe that they can do it, do better. We at least have a strategy in place. Now it's just about executing and doing damage enough to actually see more of the boss. And we're going to try to run twice a week, Monday and Thursday. And I'm going to try to share as much as I can with you guys. I don't expect to get world first. Let's be real. Like that's not the goal, but it's fun. It's fun to just work with the team, the same people, kind of grind together, the ups and the downs, and eventually pass together. That's always the best part. Kind of the community, doing it with the people that you've done previous bosses with and things like that. So that's just kind of what's going on. Battle analysis for me, Damien. But I'm curious, what are you guys doing with battle analysis? Are you guys doing the same things I did? Other things that you're looking out for testing, maybe for your class, something you learned that you didn't know before, right? Something maybe changed your rotation completely. Let me know in the comments. I'm excited to see what kind of tests you guys are doing. Maybe it'll kind of pique my interest as well. I'm all for whatever you guys are doing, right? I think there's just so many different routes you guys can take, tests you can do. I'm excited to hear what you guys think and do. Excited for this patch. This update was small, but it's still exciting. Battle analysis is still exciting. Just another tool in the toolbox. And we're always going to have unlimited tries. V3 is going to be out. Rebalance is going to show up. Amazing. Just another dub in for a patch. 6 for 6 in my opinion. I don't know where I'd rank this one. I definitely put it above Sia and Arc. I don't think I can put it above anything else. Maybe. But either way, epic update. Just a lot more to come. If I share anything, if I learn anything else, I'll definitely talk about in the next podcast next week. We definitely do more testing and learn more things. So make sure you subscribe, like, comment below kind of things you're testing, things you're excited for, things that you learned, whatever it is, anything that you're doing with battle analysis. Let me know what's exciting you about that and what have you been testing. Until then, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time.